February 1987, rural Kentucky. On the afternoon of the 17th, 14-year-old Jennifer Lynn Garlet stepped out of her middle school, her jacket unzipped despite the chill, backpack slung casually over one shoulder. She followed the same familiar path she had walked hundreds of times before, past the chain-link fence, along the narrow residential stretch, and then she vanished. No struggle, no raised voices, no witnesses. The playground beyond the school, once a place of laughter and small quarrels, became the threshold of uncertainty. By nightfall, her absence was palpable, the quiet in her home pressing against walls lined with routine. Calls were made, neighbors checked, and the first search began. Slow, careful, almost tentative. Yet the ground offered nothing. No footprints, no evidence of passage, only silence. For decades, that silence held an unbroken witness to the unknown. If you want to explore what happened beneath the surface and uncover the truth hidden for nearly 30 years, subscribe and follow this investigation closely. Jennifer's disappearance was first treated as a possible runaway. The local police, adhering to protocol, catalogued her room, interviewed family, classmates, and school staff. Nothing suggested she had planned to leave. Clothes were untouched, personal items intact, her routine undisrupted. Volunteers formed search parties, combing fields, ditches, and the playground with flashlights slicing narrow paths through the cold February dusk. Canine units traced her scent from the school fence to the edge of the playground, then lost it abruptly. The dogs did not drift off gradually. The trail ended as if the earth itself had swallowed her. Investigators considered the possibilities: contamination of the scent, abduction by vehicle, or something else entirely. Repeated interviews with classmates and neighbors yielded conflicting details. Some recalled her talking to someone, others insisted she was alone. Substitute teachers, bus drivers, custodians. H was questioned, memories cross-referenced, yet no definitive pattern emerged. The playground became central not due to evidence of violence, but because it was the last place anyone could agree Jennifer had been. Days stretched into weeks. The town's rhythm altered. Parents walked children to school. Playgrounds emptied early, fear settling in silently among routines. Officers extended their search outward, checking every building, creek, and shed. Helipads traced the gray sky above, their noise cutting through the town, yet nothing surfaced. Tips arrived, some genuine, some hoaxes, but nothing led to Jennifer. Investigators began to feel the first stirrings of unease. What if the answer had been close all along? Years later, a former detective would describe the first 48 hours as pivotal, the critical period when assumptions delayed the recognition that a crime had likely occurred on school grounds. By the third day, Kentucky State Police arrived, formalizing the search with grids, structured protocols, and methodical sweeps of the surrounding fields and woods. Volunteers, neighbors, farmers, teachers scanned the land meticulously, boots sinking into mud, eyes combing every inch. Yet the playground, the epicenter of her last known location, revealed only dirt, leaves, and silence. Interviews continued, records from 1987 examined for anyone with unaccounted access. One name began to emerge, a former maintenance worker employed by the district at the time, whose flexible schedule and unsupervised presence at the playground raised questions. He had since died, leaving no possibility of direct interrogation. Investigators relied on employment records, payroll data, and historical work orders to reconstruct his movements. The lack of eyewitness accounts, absence of struggle, and abrupt scent loss at the playground created a chilling pattern. The scenario took shape in careful reconstruction. Jennifer walked her usual path, encountered someone who blended into the environment, and was taken quickly, quietly, leaving no immediate trace. Her belongings, later discovered decades beneath the playground, were deliberately concealed, indicating foresight and planning rather than panic. At the center of this investigation lay a single question: how had someone acted with such precision in a space that was both public and familiar? Comment below if you think the playground held the key all along, waiting silently beneath the surface. As the investigation deepened, subtle anomalies began to surface around the playground and school grounds. Officers reviewing old reports noted inconsistent logs. Radio communications from 1987 mentioned equipment failures that were never fully explained. Static plagued calls between patrol units during initial searches. Odd interferences that, at the time, were attributed to weather or faulty wiring. Compass readings for mapping the search grids occasionally drifted, though technicians later confirmed the devices were functioning within normal parameters. These small, almost imperceptible irregularities were overlooked in the rush of initial activity, but decades later, they were re-examined with renewed scrutiny. Investigators also uncovered discrepancies in witness accounts. Some recalled seeing Jennifer near the playground, others swore she had turned back toward the school building. Footprints documented by early search teams were incomplete, ending abruptly or appearing in places inconsistent with her known route. A few tracks were faint impressions in mud, too irregular to determine whether they were human or animal. The sudden cessation of physical evidence mirrored the scent trail lost to the canine units in 1987. Each anomaly reinforced the unnerving idea that Jennifer had, vanished in a space under constant observation. Additional review of security and maintenance. Logs revealed that access to the school grounds was rarely restricted. Groundskeepers, custodians, and service personnel moved through the area with little oversight. In hindsight, investigators realized that someone familiar with these routines could act without drawing attention, exploiting the hours when the playground was empty or lightly monitored. The combination of interrupted radio logs, impossible footprints, and the peculiar gaps in witnessed memory created a pattern that was difficult to ignore. Each small inconsistency added weight to a larger, invisible design, one that suggested intentional concealment. The deeper investigators looked, the more the familiar landscape of the playground felt alien, almost coated every layer of earth and concrete, holding fragments of a story decades in the making. If you are following the timeline closely, consider giving this video a like. Every engagement helps uncover the truth behind these cold cases. Jennifer Lynn Garlet had been, by all accounts, an ordinary fool. Her classmates remembered her as quiet but engaged. Someone who laughed easily, who adjusted her backpack without a second thought, who moved through the hallways and playground with a calm familiarity. Teachers noted her consistency, no sudden emotional shifts, no academic pressure mounting to a breaking point. She had routines, yes, but in them was comfort, not confinement. On the afternoon of February 17, 1987, she followed her path home as she had countless times before, unknowingly stepping toward a point where normalcy would fracture entirely. Family recollections describe a home filled with ordinary interactions, evening chores, shared meals, arguments over homework. Nothing suggested she was unhappy, nothing suggested she was planning to leave. Her mother remembered the last time she called out to Jennifer as she left the school, the faint echo of footsteps down the sidewalk, the soft brushing of coat fabric against her backpack strap. That sound became the last tangible trace. In the following hours, the absence settled into the home like a cold draft, unnoticed at first, then unyielding. The small-town fabric of Kentucky magnified the sense of loss. Everyone knew everyone else's children. The streets were familiar. Paths home were predictable. To vanish in such a context seemed impossible. Yet Jennifer did. Friends remembered glimpses, a hair tucked behind an ear, a fleeting wave. The way she adjusted her coat, but the details grew increasingly uncertain under repeated questioning. Memory, under stress, bent and shifted. Nothing else could be confirmed. For decades, Jennifer remained 14 in the collective memory of the town. The playground, the sidewalks, the houses lining her roots all stood as silent witnesses to her disappearance. Each anniversary of her absence brought renewed reflection, a reminder of time passing without progress. Investigators, family, and neighbors were left with fragments of her life, items she carried, pages she had written, the echo of a final walk that never concluded. Neighbors recalled the stillness that followed her disappearance, the absence of sound where there should have been life. Street corners that had been vibrant with children playing went quiet. Bicycles leaned unused against fences. The rhythms of the town shifted subtly, imperceptibly, as though her absence reverberated through the fabric of daily life. Teachers remembered the empty desks, the seats that had once held her energy and attention, and the lingering uncertainty that grew with each day. Jennifer's personal belongings, her jacket, her backpack, her notebooks became symbols of loss, but also of continuity, reminders that she had existed, that she had been here, and that something terrible had intervened. Even as new generations entered the school and played on the renovated playground, her presence lingered invisibly, a quiet insistence that she had not simply disappeared into the ordinary world. Friends who had grown into adulthood often revisited that day in their memories, retracing paths, imagining choices, wondering if something small, something imperceptible, could have prevented her from vanishing. The weight of her absence extended beyond grief. It shaped behavior, created caution, introduced questions that could not be answered. Parents escorted children along streets once considered safe, watched doors and windows with heightened awareness, and instinctively guarded routines that had once been unquestioned. Jennifer's disappearance did not only remove her from the town, it altered the town itself, imprinting a subtle wariness, a quiet vigilance over daily life. Through decades, the family clung to fragments of her world, preserving them, speaking her name, and refusing to let memory fade. The frozen image of Jennifer at 14 remained vivid, a girl stepping through a schoolyard gate, adjusting her backpack strap, unaware that her life would be rewritten by absence and secrecy. Her story, though paused abruptly, continued to define the edge of the ordinary, the threshold where familiarity ended and uncertainty began. The discovery of the locker beneath the playground in 2014 reframed the investigation entirely. For nearly 3 decades, searches, interviews, and theories had followed paths that led nowhere. Now, with physical evidence emerging from the soil, investigators could trace the timeline not outward into speculation, but inward, toward the school grounds where Jennifer Lynn Garlet was last seen. The items inside the locker, textbooks, notebooks, a jacket, were not discarded remnants. They had been deliberately placed, buried beneath layers of earth and concrete, sealed in a manner suggesting knowledge of construction schedules, soil behavior, and human patterns. Every detail of the locker's placement, its angle, its proximity to certain playground structures, indicated planning and intention. Forensic teams approached the scene with methodical precision. Soil samples were analyzed for composition and layering, the corrosion on the locker, the condition of its contents, the arrangement of personal items all were logged, photographed, and preserved. The minutiae, from the alignment of pages in notebooks to the folds of fabric, were studied as evidence of human decision. Investigators noted that the act of concealment required a quiet understanding of the environment, someone who knew how the space would change over time, someone who anticipated renovations and assumed the ground's memory would outlast human attention. Radiologs and maintenance records from 1987 were revisited. Gaps in employment schedules, unaccounted for absences, and access permissions surfaced as patterns. A former maintenance worker emerged as the person most likely capable of such an act. His job granted him unsupervised access to the playground and storage areas. Records indicated flexible schedules, days with unclear activity, and movements that could not be corroborated decades later, though he was deceased by the time the locker was discovered. The reconstruction of his potential timeline aligned with the evidence in the soil. The focus shifted from broad suspicion to a narrower, precise understanding of opportunity and proximity. Conflicting metadata from archived files and photos further complicated the narrative. Early documentation misclassified the case. Notes from different officers contradicted one another, and some interviews contained details impossible to verify. Yet in the context of the locker's discovery, inconsistencies revealed not deception but limitations. Human memory filtered through decades of assumption. Every anomaly was reinterpreted as a clue, a guide, a measure of the care with which the evidence had been concealed. Investigators conducted controlled excavations around the locker, using ground-penetrating radar to identify irregularities in the surrounding soil. Some anomalies were dismissed as utilities or past construction, but a few suggested deliberate disturbance. Each was documented, meticulously analyzed against historical scale, and mapped relative to the playground's layout in 1987. These precise methods demonstrated that the ground itself had been manipulated intentionally, not by chance. Despite the advances, certain mysteries remained. The perpetrator would never face questioning. Jennifer's remains were not recovered. The motive, while inferred from intent and action, could not be confirmed in full. Investigators noted that the act of concealment was not hurried. It was careful, controlled, and executed with a clear understanding of human trust in familiar spaces. The playground, a site of childhood innocence, had been repurposed temporarily as a hiding place, a silent witness for decades. The community absorbed the revelation in layers. Parents who had walked their children past the same equipment, teachers who had watched students play, and investigators who had combed the ground decades earlier, were confronted with the realization that the truth had been close all along. The subtle realization lingered. Proximity does not always equate to safety. The site that was once a place of routine and visibility had concealed a violent act, and it had done so successfully because of careful human planning, not supernatural intervention. As files were updated and the case officially reclassified from runaway to homicide, investigators paused to consider the implications. Every detail reinforced the conclusion that Jennifer had never left the grounds alive. Every physical trace corroborated a scenario that had been suspected but unprovable until the locker emerged. Yet the absence of her remains, the gaps in memory, and the limitations imposed by time maintained an unresolved tension. Viewers, like investigators, are left with a sense of uneasy recognition that the truth, while partially revealed, remains incomplete. The careful reconstruction of events, the alignment of access, opportunity, and evidence, underscored a chilling reality. Human actions can hide in plain sight, concealed by time and routine. And while some answers had been unearthed, the full extent of what lay beneath the ground remained unknown. For those following the case, the reminder was clear. Comment below with your theories about what might still be hidden, and how the ground itself may hold further truths waiting to surface. As the case documentation expanded, investigators encouraged public engagement, asking for anyone with knowledge of school routines, construction, or staff presence in 1987 to come forward. Each comment could hold significance. Every recollection potentially bridging gaps decades old. Decades of uncertainty had finally yielded a fragment of clarity. The buried locker, sealed beneath concrete and soil, had spoken for Jennifer Lynn Garlet when no witness could. Her belongings confirmed what memory had long suspected. She had never left the vicinity of her school alive. Yet the resolution was partial, incomplete. Her remains were not recovered. The perpetrator, long deceased, would never explain, never account, never answer the questions left dangling over the quiet streets of rural Kentucky. Forensic analysis offered precision where human recollection faltered. Fibers, soil composition, material traces all painted a picture of deliberate concealment. The earth itself had preserved the truth, while time, renovations, and daily routines had masked it. Each item inside the locker was a relic, frozen midlife, a testament to a girl who would never grow up. Investigators noted, in quiet tones, that the ground had retained memory in ways the human mind could not, recording the sequence of events for decades. The town moved forward, playgrounds replaced, children played, and parents watched without knowing the history beneath their feet. Yet the unanswered questions lingered. What else might the ground conceal? Could other secrets, buried intentionally or by accident, remain undiscovered? Subscriptions to new evidence and cold case reviews became lifelines for those determined to preserve memory. And for viewers, a reminder that the past is not inert. If you want to follow more cases where truth is hidden in plain sight, consider subscribing and staying with us as we examine these shadows. In the end, Jennifer Lynn Garlet's story remained partially unresolved, a spectral presence beneath a familiar, a silence that had waited decades to be heard. And in that silence, one chilling certainty remained: she had never truly left the place she disappeared from.